All right. So hey everyone, how's it going? How are you all doing? So I don't know if this is gonna make the recording, but I'm a very unconventional speaker, especially when I actually get to engage with the audience. Some people have different philosophies on this. My philosophy is heckle me whenever. I will put a limit of like 3 or 4. Exactly, that's the spirit. Actually, whoever heckles best gets maple syrup. That's actually a thing. That's actually a thing. I mean the book too, but the maple syrup comes in addition. I'm trying to be like Oprah, you know. It's like, here's the chicken tendies, here's your maple syrup, here's your Bitcoin book. So yeah, all this to say, like, I'm not too precious. Like, if you're confused, dazed, sick, or anything, just let us know. You don't even have to put up your hand or anything. I do implement a rule because this spirit of good faith was violated one time by someone who did ask me 23 questions. I actually counted each individual question he asked. So I will probably cut you off after 3 or 4, unless they're like really good, like one-line zingers. Like we keep that spirit going. So yeah, let me get a little bit started. A little bit about me. My name is Roger Huang, helpfully enumerated in the slides here. I was born in China, but I grew up in Canada. But that did not prevent me from going back and forth between China and Canada because my family, a lot of them live in China. And so I got pretty much firsthand experience with like the Chinese surveillance state. I was trying to work like on my jobs for remote Canadian US companies through the Great Firewall, and the entire time I was like, fuck, like, why is it like Google's so slow? Like, what is this bullshit? Like, I can't do anything. But it was at the, you know, it's funny because I think there's all these like really abstract conversations, right? It's like the surveillance state, China versus US, like where do you stand? And what I kind of realized is after a while, like I'm kind of living that experience. And so I just kind of want to bring some of that, you know, those two different cultures that have a lot of things happening between them together a little bit more, and just try to give you all a little bit of a feel for what it's like. China, you know, obviously the mysterious country of a million parables and everything like that. Okay, so 2 other ground rules before I really get started. The second is that, yes, people treat me like I am China's ambassador to Bitcoin. I've been asked when Xi Jinping will invade Taiwan. I've been asked, you know, about raw earth minerals. I've been asked like all these questions that I'm I'm not paid enough to answer those questions, you know, like that's way above my pay grade. I will try my best. But at the end of the presentation, I actually have 3 books on China that are super helpful if you just want to like understand China in general. Now, having said that, please, like ask anything because there's going to be a lot of references. People may or may not get lost, but I'm here for you if you do. And then the third ground rule is really just, you know, have fun. I don't know. This topic and this slide deck could be construed as like really heavy stuff. You know, we're gonna talk about all the big gaudy things, war and peace, strategy, Bitcoin and China. You know, sometimes I show my book to people and like it's an automatic, like they're like, oh my God, this is about Bitcoin, which I don't understand. And this is about China, which I don't understand. So it's like, you know, like I definitely have had that before. The intention of this, even though this is my fault, I always slip in obscure philosophy references and things like that as we go. So that hopefully will not be too painful, but my whole point is that this is meant to be fun. And I'm trying to bring this in the spirit of fun and curiosity. And point with the heckling, anything stands. Like if you guys have any questions, you guys have anything that comes up, just let me know. We're all on this adventure together. And with that, let's talk a little bit about the content. So, you know, China is the world's largest electricity producer. Some of you may or may not know this. Yeah. I mean, you know, you see this line, right? It's like, yeah. I mean, you know, that's kind of, yeah. I mean, one of the things that's kind of really impressive is how flat it's been, like, like just throughout the years. You know, China's also constructing a 10-year high in terms of coal power plants, like really trying to. It has the world's largest grid and is not showing signs of stopping. China's where Bitcoin miners were born. All of us, we came from like a heat punk summit. The specialized mining chips that go and mine Bitcoin, they were built originally in China. And a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs, Canaan, who built one of the original ASICs, which are these mining chips, they actually came to the heat punk summit, which I thought was like a really cool callback because they were actually the first company to build a chip specialized for mining in China. And China also wants to dominate like technology and cyberspace. You probably have heard about this to some extent. Like, for example, the Chinese are going to take over like smart cars. There's smart cities. There's facial surveillance. There's AI. There's all this. And there's a lot of planning and planning cycles that go into this whole idea of how China wants to dominate different technologies, from AI to electric vehicles. In general, what this picture is trying to make the point of is that China's had a lot more success, I think, at larger levels. For example, electric vehicles. There is no question that China's completely dominating in that field. But at smaller levels, at the more micro level, for example, semiconductors and new materials and everything else, China does struggle to a certain extent. I just said all this stuff about how I'm not going to try to give you guys everything about China. And this is the 101. But this really gets me to the question, why did China ban Bitcoin mining? Why did this happen? You would think that a country that was trying to dominate technology, that has the world's largest electricity grid, would be all over Bitcoin mining. And I kind of go over a couple of reasons here just to shake up the audience a little bit. China hates capitalism. People also get very confused with, and they ask me, again, guy who just wrote a book about Bitcoin in China, is China capitalist? Is China socialist? Is China communist, right? And so I have my 5-second answer prepared for that, but it, to be very, very frank, is a very complex question and answer. Chinese officials fear Bitcoin. There's too much electricity, energy usage, environmental concerns, and it's against central planning. Maybe these are all plausible sounding reasons, but let's go into it, right? Because why did China ban Bitcoin mining? It doesn't, obviously, the people here in this audience, I'm assuming none of you are Chinese officials, although I haven't checked yet, but, assumably we're all on the Bitcoin side, right? We're all hey, Bitcoin mining just makes a lot of sense, right? There's heat reuse, it's helps balance grids, you're mining this new network, this new money that people are using around the world. So why would the country with the world's largest electrical grid, the country that wants to dominate all technologies, just suddenly take a look at Bitcoin and say no? That's just not going to be something that we do. We don't care that Chinese entrepreneurs and Chinese miners are a big part of this come up. We don't care about any of that. This is a threat more than is a saving grace. And so this is the first of my philosophical references. So apologies in advance to everyone who now has to squint at a tiny screen. But one of the things that comes up with China, so I want to start kind of with the why. So we went over some, just to go back a little bit, some plausible sounding reasons why China might ban Bitcoin mining. Of course, us as Bitcoiners were wow, China banned Bitcoin mining and now the network's stronger than ever, right? That's so great. And we see it as a big strategic miss, right? But it's interesting to think, why would the Chinese government think that it's not, right? And in order to start understanding that, we now have to peer into, I believe, one of the greatest black boxes in human history. It may be quantum computing, it may not be, it may be quantum mechanics, but somewhere up there is Chinese elite politics. We do not understand it. we cannot really understand what's going on, and there seem to be many conflicting principles. So I start with the story. For those of you guys, I'm going to start pacing a little bit, but for those of you who don't know, there's this really, really funny story that I find so hilarious about how Americans perceive China, right? And there's this stock stereotype. It's oh, the Chinese leadership, they're so wise, they're so strategic. Kissinger wrote a book where he was the Chinese people play Go, so they're gonna dominate the world. We're just these dummies that play chess. We could never catch up with their brains. We can never catch up with their Go brains, right? But it's how, anyways, so beyond that, Some of this perception just comes from these like kind of cycles. And so I wanted to bring up the story because I just find it so hilarious. Because one person asked the Chinese official one time, they're like, "What do you think about the French Revolution?" And that Chinese like minister answered like, "Oh, I don't think we know what the consequences of it are yet." And from that, Western policymakers have assumed forever, look at the foresight of Chinese policymakers. Like, the French Revolution hasn't concluded yet. Like, we don't know what the implications are. But really, Zhou Enlai was talking about the events of the 1968 French Revolution. So I'm trying to hit two things. One, Americans, sorry, don't really know anything about the history of other people. So if those of you who do know, how many people, raise your hand, you'll get a maple syrup if you know the honest answer to this. Was there a revolution in France in 1968? Does anyone have their hand up? Okay, no maple syrup for anyone. But there was, and it was actually like a really weird revolution. There were these surrealist artists, and these like graffiti punks, these like authors that just kind of suddenly revolted and chased Charles de Gaulle from power in France. He had to like leave exile for like a little while. That's what the Chinese leadership was talking about. So when they asked that question, it was literally when it was happening. So imagine someone was like, "Hey, like, what do you think about Iran?" And you were like, "Oh, well, like, we don't know what's going to happen with Iran. It hasn't concluded yet, right?" But you're really talking about like the war now, right? You're really talking about just like right now, right? So this, I think, feeds into a stereotype of like Chinese leadership and Chinese elite politics. And I try to bring this up, just, you guys can tell I put a lot of production value into the slides, but some think, there's this like pop psychology version of Chinese elite politics. And it is quite important for us to at least grasp the finer details of how Chinese elites make decisions in order to understand why China would ban Bitcoin in the first place. And I think the pop psychology version goes something like this, which is repeated by Ray Dalio, Vitalik, and all these other people that we don't like and don't mention. Okay? It's this idea that, oh, China is this like large Confucian society, the civilization, it runs deep, the principles throughout. And I gotta tell you, that's kind of bullshit. I mean, granted, my dad still cites them to me every time I'm like, a little rebellious. He's always like, "Don't forget, the father deserves respect from the son." I'm not saying Confucianism does not have an impact on Chinese society or Chinese elite politics. But what I am saying is that it's grossly overestimated. And in fact, most modern, Chinese politics and philosophy doesn't really stem from this like Confucian root. And one of the first things Mao did in the Cultural Revolution, for example, was to tell the Red Guards to go and desecrate the grave of Confucius, right? So that's just an example of all the confusing twists and turns. Mao was very much an anti-Confucian. He thought of Confucius as kind of this traditionalist that the revolution was meant to destroy, and the youth of China would go out there. So I agree with you. That doesn't count as a heckle, just so you know. But I do agree with you. But when we talk about the real stuff, and this is even now where I'm like, Chinese elite politics, very hard to see the grain of things. The philosophers that seem to have more relevance for modern-day China are actually German philosophers. I've written in the past that I don't think any country has been more cursed by German philosophers than China. Marx, Hegel, and now Carl Schmitt, who some of you may know, the Nazi crown jurist. We can go over the history. But in general, someone who was a very strong fan of strong states. I'm kind of oversimplifying that position. The reason why I bring this up is because I did originally think about going 3 or 4 slides deep into Carl Schmitt in China, but then I realized that is not what brought me here today, fine gentlemen and lady of the crowd. But to just make the point that in Chinese elite politics, don't grab at like the shadows, the form. Look a little bit deeper into what's really going on. And even when you look a little bit deeper, like even when I say this Carl Schmitt stuff, I'm always constantly trying to reappraise whether or not the guy actually does have impact. Like certainly he's more cited in academic journals. He's been cited in the national security law stuff in Hong Kong. but it's very, very hard to get a read on Chinese elite politics. And one of the reasons why is because Chinese elite politics is run basically by one guy. And this one guy is very, very, very mercantile. And there have been a lot of purges recently. I want to tell you guys about what I think is the funniest story, or I mean, it's kind of sad too, to your point. By the way, these are like the most senior members of the military that he's now purged the second round of. And Ling Jihua, actually, I think, is, I would say, probably like the funniest story to me. It's kind of sad. So he was in the previous generation of leadership in China. And his disgrace from power came because his son kind of slammed the like triple slam of like scandalous things you could do. He was driving a luxury sports car. He crashed it into a highway because he had two prostitutes from ethnic regions, Tibet and Xinjiang, in his car. He killed the prostitutes. Yeah, it's like pretty rough. And then his dad had to go and like tell the censors, like, you gotta censor this story. Like, this cannot come out. So he's purged. I mean, it was a little bit like, it was a little bit too much. Like, it was like a bridge crossed too far.
I have a point of clarification.
Yeah.
When you say purge, you mean like fire, right?
No, life sentence in jail, expelled from the party.
As opposed to kill.
Well, not killed.
Okay.
Or, no, not killed. None of them are killed. Zoyo, life sentence without parole, expelled from the party. Typically, they're expelled from the party and then life sentence in prison. Even Bo Xilai, who was, I think, one of the most prominent people to have been purged, like, he's still doing a life sentence. He was, yes?
Honestly, I don't hate that. They just put the politicians that do bad stuff
Yeah.
in prison for life. I don't hate that. Honestly, you should do that.
I don't hate it either. I'm just gonna put that out there. But yeah. I don't hate it either. But I will say the point of these slides is just to say that like one guy pretty much decides a lot of what goes on. Yes.
And I'm just curious because this looks, for some reason, this just reminds me exactly of LinkedIn. Like, it looks like a LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Where do they go?
Where do they go in prison? It's a good question. I'm gonna ask Rock like right after this talk.
Because I assume if you're like the president or like a senator or whatever, you go like to like one of the nicest prisons. But I don't know which federal prison that is.
Well, I think in China it's like a little bit like, you know, it's like you betrayed the party and you took like a hell of a lot of bribes and you got to be made an example of. So I don't know, but maybe. I do know one thing, which is that I love this is being recorded. I do know one thing, which is that the Chinese state has these like residential detention things, and they try to like embarrass you in like humiliating ways in Chinese settings. Like one thing that they do is they try to make you go nude. Don't ask me how I know all this stuff. But like they force you to go nude because most Chinese people are very embarrassed about that. I don't know. I feel like if they got like a Bitcoiner in jail or something, it'd be like a very weird. Maybe. Yeah.
Like all the cafeteria food is full of seed oils.
Yeah, I mean, they would probably just be like, they'd probably just have a printout of like the Bitcoin price, but it'd be like wrong, and then it would just keep on continually going down like every day. That'd probably be what that is. But yes, yes, Xi Jinping is trying to connect with you on LinkedIn. Accept or ignore his request. He's got a lot of mutual connections of yours. Like it's a good fit. So yeah, wow, my slides were more serious than I thought they were. So all this to say that like there's a lot of stuff happening. There's kind of two areas in China that have been a little underwatched, and to just sum it up really shortly, like both the military and the central bank are kind of seen as a plank of China's battle of systems. And so they're really leveraged. All central banks suck. I think we can all agree on that. China's central bank is particularly subordinated to political will, but of course, all central banks everywhere are close to political power as well. I think the one difference that needs to be said is that basically the military and the central bank are actually becoming more, quote unquote, Western in some ways. They're more market-based targeting, interest-based. They used to be reserve rate-based, which is more like a quota. You know, but these changes are still something where there's a lot of purges happening, and it's very clear that if you violate kind of like the party's control, that you are going to go down. Do you have a question or heckle? Okay. So now we get to all the way back. You're like, wow, what are we even talking about at this point? But you know, so why did China ban Bitcoin mining? So we just spent 5 minutes not understanding anything about Chinese elite politics. So why did China ban Bitcoin mining? And a common one I hear sometimes from Bitcoiners, I have to say, is that China hates capitalism, or China is a communist country, or China is this or that. And I fear that that is not true. And oh, I might have just shut down the slides. That wasn't the Chinese government. That was just me. The censors are here. Yeah. So basically, yeah. So we go to this slide, and Hunter, we were just talking about Deng Xiaoping. AZ quotes, you know, my design. Yeah, it's Motivational Monday. I mean, you gotta put it on the desktop, right? You gotta, yeah. That's gotta be. There you go. There you go. Greed is good. Deng Xiaoping also had the famous quote, you know, it doesn't matter if a mouse, if it's a white cat or a black cat, as long as it catches mice, it's a good cat.
Well, the thing I would say is communism with Chinese characteristics
Socialism.
is really kind of no different in many ways from capitalism with American characteristics.
Mm.
Like they're very similar. Like from the Austrian perspective, they're both socialist and nonsense.
And they're both converging, because the Chinese model is actually trying to inherit. And
Similar than they are different.
and I know we didn't get down into that whole rabbit hole of like Carl Schmitt or like whatever, but you know, some of the latest Chinese state philosophers, unclear how or whether they actually have impact at the highest halls of power, but they actually, these Chinese philosophers are saying like capitalism is like a central part of the Chinese constitutional order. And they're saying that, in fact, like China is trying to inherit the American system. In fact, the argument that China makes is that America has abandoned the global trade system and the global financial flows. So China is actually going to be the next world empire that will inherit, that America is an empire and that China will inherit it. So, I mean, yeah. Good luck. Have fun. It's a huge burden. Don't wish it on anyone, right? Yeah, exactly. And so all this to make probably a short, punchy point that if you thought that China hates Bitcoin because Chinese people hate making money or capitalism is bad, I regret to inform you the opposite. I don't think there is. I actually continually ask people who manage other people in China, like whatever, different companies, and I'm like, what's motivating people? Like money. There's no, and I'm sure some of you have seen it here. And actually, in fact, us as heap punks, that's our #1 complaint about the Bitcoin mining companies, about Bitmain. It's like, they're just this like black box that cares nothing except about money. They only care about making money. Like they only care about making US dollars. It's a very strange paradigm if you think about it. So if you were thinking like, oh, China has a problem with Bitcoin because, you know, capitalism is bad, that's not quite the reason. So moving on from that. So another reason people bring up is like, are, you know, Chinese officials, you know, do they fear using Bitcoin? And I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail. But the short answer is no. Chinese elites do use Bitcoin. Quite a few of them do. And we have specific cases that are actually quite based. And I will, you know, we got Ross freed. Let's free Xiao Yi, man. He was just trying to run a Bitcoin mining company. Like, what's going on there? So Chinese elites use Bitcoin. I think people in the party use it. I think it's not an open secret. A lot of local officials mine. There was still Bitcoin mining happening in China, even though there was a ban. And that could only have been really possible if the local officials were not involved somehow. Because you're going to tell me like, oh, there's like, well, there's like all this noise being made, and like our grid is like totally getting kaput. Like, I wonder what's going on. Like, what's happening, right? Like, so to get into that in a little bit more detail, Xiao Yi is actually, bless his heart, life in prison. You know, he ran a $300 million Bitcoin company. He basically turned the whole province's resources to like mining Bitcoin, which I think was kind of based. Like, he was just like, the best use of all this stranded hydroelectricity is just to just mine Bitcoin and mine a shit ton of it, and I'm just gonna take like my cut. Do your thing. But obviously the Chinese powers that be did not look very favorably upon that, and now he's life in prison. He had to make like a very public atonement and all this other stuff. Hao Gang is like another example of someone who got bribed in order to, this is also a very common story. They got bribed in order to, you know, he was a financial regulator, and they got bribed in order to help hide or launder private mining companies. So it's like a cooperation between Bitcoin miners and the government. And at one point, one of these Bitcoin mining companies, their founder was like on the no travel list, and he got the guy off the list. This is kind of a little bit more how China works. Like, okay, so first off, I should never have said that, because I'm always the biggest proponent of like, China's so big and complex, I can never define it in one statement. But one thing, I think it's like a lot more like Gordon Gekko, hustle, like people like cheating on each other a little bit, like the grind, the hustle. I actually think to the extent that China is competitive to the US, and you can see it in these trends like this, is not necessarily because, you know, it's just, for me, it's like a straight out function of like, it's not the government. Because I think the government does a lot of really dumb things. For example, the government hired 500,000 blockchain engineers, or is planning to. I don't really even know what that's about, right? But it's really the people. Like, the people are hustling, and they are willing to like do anything to make money. And to be honest with you, like, there's a good and there's a bad in that, but that is how you see these like defining epochal companies like Bitmain and others that are still with us to this day, that are still so dominant. And you know, is Jihan in it for the values or the principles? Maybe, maybe not. He made a ton of money, and he invested it all in AI. So we see this kind of succession, these waves coming in through and through. So I love how this is recorded, because my government minder will also watch this as well. So that'll be a good fun thing. So there's also similar like stories. The PBOC, like the People's Bank of China, which is China's central bank, was also corrupt when it launched its central bank digital currency. The guy was bribed. It's a very, that's the one thing that I feel like, I don't want to make an overstatement on this, but like China's a lot about bribery or corruption. Like, yes, yes, but the corruption in China is a little bit different in the sense of like, it's almost like the central authorities want to stop it but can't. It's almost like ingrained in the culture, and they try to make examples of the people like Xiao Yi, free Xiao Yi, and everyone else. But really, you know, it's all the central function. And the purges are making elites nervous. Right now it's the medical sector and the military. And at the heart of it, like, and we're going to go into this because we're going to go into a slide of why Bitcoin won and China lost. That was a little bit pandering, but whatever. But at the heart of it is like this really big conflict, which is that Xi Jinping is tasking all the local provincial leaders with poverty elevation. He's saying, your number one goal is to elevate poverty in your district. And a lot of these provincial leaders have these big stranded hydroelectric dams that are not doing anything. And you're like, well, okay, build a data center. But it's like, I have to build bandwidth. I have to build like internet connection. I have to build all this stuff. So like, why not just go get some local tax revenue? Yeah, you'll take a slice, but that's like just the Chinese way, right? You'll take that little slice and mine around that stranded power. And I mean, that's kind of the inefficiency that is being used. And it's a very big one, because I did say China had the world's biggest electricity grid, but there's also been 2 major blackouts in the last 5 years. So it's like, how does that even make sense? And the reason why that makes sense is because the grid is unbalanced. Because you have electricity in certain areas that's not getting to other regions. some of you may or may not know this, but there are capital controls on Chinese people. This is a big hidden factor behind the global economy. A lot of us may have seen in airports or other places Chinese people buying luxury handbags and other things. There's always the trope of like, wow, our real estate market has gone up like 3,000%. You know, who is buying all the housing? I do think, speaking as someone born in China, I do think Chinese people are a little overblamed for that. I'm just saying. But the point being that like there is all this manifestation of capital flowing into the US, into Canada, into Australia. And part of the reason why is because there are capital controls. So quick primer for most people. If you're a Chinese citizen, you can only get $50,000 USD a year per person and out of the country. And in order for you to do more than that, you kind of have to send a note to this regulatory agency. It's called SAFE. And you have to be like, please allow me to purchase more US dollars. Like I have this reason, I have to travel. Travel is one of the reasons. So that's why when you see people buying luxury goods abroad, that's like one of the reasons. It's like one of the only ways to get past this capital controls. So some people have commented, well, Bitcoin, is it a way to evade capital controls? And yes, to a certain extent, and we've seen that in some instances. One of my favorite stories is Jian Wen, the takeaway worker, who like literally, by the way, if you all are gonna money launder, do not money launder like Jian Wen. Jian Wen, takeaway worker, goes to a London luxury real estate broker. I wanna buy 10 houses. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Where did you get your money from? What is your source of funds? Like, I have to ask you, like, you know, normally it's my job as a real estate person to like look the other way. Like, oh, you're like a sanctioned official from like the DRC? Like, just don't make it too obvious, right? But if you come up to me and you're like, I'm gonna pay you like 40 mil in cash and I'm gonna buy like a ton of houses, where do your funds come from? Oh, my boss just like is in the habit of gifting me like large amounts of Bitcoin. And wait, you're a takeaway worker that earned $40,000 a year? So just don't money launder like Jian Wen. But that is kind of, Bitcoin has played a role in evading capital controls in that way. It does play a role, but it's very overrated. There are many, many different ways to get around these capital controls. One of my favorite is smurfing, because it's the most caveman. It's like, well, the limit is $50,000 per person per year. But this is China. There's like so many people. Like, so you find a nephew, you find a cousin, you find whatever, you find these people. There's like these ways of getting like, you know, and then all of a sudden you're $50,000, you're using other people's limits, and you're able to transit 500,000, 5 million. You know, misreported travel vouchers, that's like $100 billion worth. So all this to say that like, yeah, maybe Bitcoin plays a role, but there's a ton of ways to evade it. Yeah, there's all kinds of different things. I mean, also in Vancouver in Canada, that was also something that was an inquiry. People would pass cash into casino chips. That's like also like kind of a known way. There's like these like kind of informal exchanges. There's a lot of ways, you know, like they liaise with the cartels, or there was someone who liaised with the cartels, which is actually quite genius because the cartels have a lot of US dollars, but don't know what to do with it. And Chinese people are like, we need US dollars. Like, we need US dollars. So someone finally put those two together, and they were like, why don't we just use these broker networks to like negotiate that? And so now you have these informal networks where the cartels basically passing physical US cash in return for Chinese banking, yeah.
Did China ever have like a gold culture in the same way the U.S. and I know India does?
I can answer that.
Yeah, let Hunter answer that.
China actually was one of the last two countries to switch from a silver standard to a gold standard. The other being India, and that was, I think, in the 1920s.
Yeah.
So like, but I assume, obviously, for the reasons we know, there's not like, people are not evading capital controls with gold.
Well, one thing I will say to that is that gold does have some cultural resonance. The Chinese central bank is buying a lot of gold right now, for example. And I know like a few dealers, I don't know how they do it, but there are people who do gold dealers. There's a little bit of overlap between people who are selling crypto, quote unquote, and stable coins and gold. But yeah, it runs into difficulties like you need physical mules.
Well, I've just noticed it's been very interesting. Like I've talked to a lot of Indian people about this, and the Indian people specifically understand like store of value, but they don't want to transfer. They don't want to transition from gold to BTC because like it's just such a
There is some of that. Right now, China, for example, there was a gold ETF that launched, and it had to be suspended because there was too much demand. No, I mean, it's like, but like, I mean, it's there. Like, there's definitely that culture, and I'll go even further than Hunter in the Chinese history. You know, the Yuan dynasty, you know, with the Mongols took us off. Those Mongols took us off like a silverback currency and turned it into a paper. It was like the first experiment in paper currency, and it failed. And you know, like a lot of the Mongols went and retreated into like these weird sexual retreats and peccadillos and spirituality. I see a lot of America in that, honestly, but like whatever, like, but yeah, like I mean, that's kind of the consequence of like that kind of fiat switch. And China's got a long-standing history of like silverbacking, and you know, China was like the large part of the Columbian Exchange. Like that was where a lot of the silver went. So there is like the capital controls are a demand factor for stablecoins and BTC, especially for stablecoins in China, because you know they're trying to just hold U.S. dollars in any form, and most of them don't have access to U.S. banking. I actually had a call with a Chinese entrepreneur, bless his heart. He was like, "Oh, like I'm gonna create a startup that helps everyone on Tether get a U.S. bank account," and I'm like, "You just did not understand the entire point of Tether. You did not understand the entire point of Tether." But yeah, for the stable coins, and sorry, my guy, if you're watching the recording or whatever, but the demand factor for stable coins is because like, yeah, it's like very hard to transact in and out. And it's not just the capital controls from a foreign currency standpoint, it's very hard to invest in foreign securities, which is why, for example, when there's a gold ETF or any ETF, or even like treasury companies, because at one point there were some Chinese companies that bought like Ethereum and Bitcoin as like treasury components, like Meituan and others, like that does boost prices on the mainland significantly for stock offerings and that, even though it's technically like kind of a gray area. And you see this with like, in China right now, the real buzz is about like real world assets, like RWA and all this other stuff. But the thing is like, yeah, there's like a million different ways BTC trades. Honestly, it's more stablecoins than BTC. That's because stablecoins, like it's lower cost and it's easier to transit between different exchanges. And I hate to say this, but like, again, sorry if this is being recorded, but I think 97% of people on Chinese crypto Twitter are shitcoiners. I'm sorry, like it's just, it is what it is. Like I gotta say it. But I love how they hang out. Like I wish you guys understood Mandarin, because like you go in these rooms and they're like legendary. It's like this guy will just live stream. He's like, oh, what do the technicals look like? What's like the MBTI groups of like the people buying this coin? Like it goes like, you know, like really, and then they like talk to each other like generationally. Like you know how like Bitcoiners are like, oh, I'm 2013, I'm 2014. They're like, oh, I got scammed by Neo. Oh, I got scammed by like this other coin. And people were like, oh, you got scammed by Neo? Like you're an OG. Like teach us more. And it's like, did we miss the entire point of all this? Did we miss it a little bit? But those conversations, I honestly, it's like a riot. There's like 5,000 or 6,000 people in those rooms. Like it's kind of crazy, yeah. Like imagine, like, you know, like, but, you know, God bless, you know, like get the stable coins in. You're in Shiba Inu now. But you know what I tell people? Because another tricky question, because everyone's trying to get me arrested, is like, hey, like, do you think Bitcoin will lead to the downfall of the Chinese government? Again, way above my pay grade, my people. But what I will say is people just follow like the incentives. It's not like this thing where like someone's returning Tiananmen Square into Bitcoin and like all of a sudden the Chinese government's gonna fall apart. Like, no. But it's just incentives. It's not even like the revolution. It's like, you know how you say the revolution will not be televised? And by the way, I want this to be clear to any minders or anything else. I am not saying anything about the current status of Taiwan, China, or anything else. Please note the caveat. But what I am saying is, no, I've been on record already. Like the YouTube channel's got me. You know, SatsConf, I was like, free Jimmy Lai, like free the Hong Kong. I'm pretty sure I violated the national security law. That's all good. We're all here for it. Yeehaw. Let me give you your real thoughts, guys. No, but I mean, I genuinely think like, I'm not trying to be like, actually like pushy as to my real opinions, right? Like, I think Bitcoin, you know, is, like, the point I'm trying to make with that is the revolution's not gonna be televised. It's not this like big, dramatic thing. We live now in a battle of systems and we live now in a battle of numbers. And the fact that so many people are voluntarily choosing to take their earnings outside the system, even though the system's putting so many obstacles on them, you know, even if it's into Shiba Inu or whatever, it's a big step. It's a big step outside. And I think that has to be recognized. And I think it frankly gives a lot of hope. And I'm not going to be on here and like Gordon Chang predict that the Chinese government will fail like 20 times or 80 times. But what I will say is that, you know, the fact that these capital controls exist, the fact that Chinese people are free to earn money but not spend it internationally or invest into other different markets just because that's how the Chinese state model works, that is a very real demand factor for stable coins and Bitcoin. And, you know, because all of us Bitcoiners here, we're always asking each other, like, where's the next billion? Who's the next billion? Like, what's the next billion? Guys, I have a fact for you guys. China has 1.3 billion people. Oh, yeah. But let's round down. Let's round down. Let's take Jimmy Dean and, okay, let's round down all the single male ones, whatever. That's 30 million, by the way. That's 30 million, 40 million. So we're down. Let's even take it to 1.1. Let's shave like 200 million, let's say. God, that sounds brutal. I hope that doesn't get clipped or something. That sounds brutal out of context.
Two questions. One, I was under the impression that there are actually two forms of currency in China.
Yeah, so there is an overseas, this kind of has to do with the capital controls. There is an overseas version of the yuan, renminbi, and there's a domestic version. And the overseas version trades freely on Singapore. But the problem with the overseas version, and that's why a lot of Chinese companies and exporters don't want the overseas version, even though it's like freely floating, is that it's still like pretty much pegged to the domestic one, right? Like in order to really use it, you have to. So a lot of the Chinese exporters, and I'm hearing this, you know, like on the ground, not stuff I can write about actually. So you guys are getting the real juice. This is all stuff I can never put my pen to. But yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of, I don't think it's like a kind of an open secret. A lot of Chinese exporters are taking stable coins. It just makes a lot of sense for them because they don't want to take the Chinese yuan in either one of the domestic or the overseas form. Because the overseas form still pegs them to a lot of restrictions. What was your second question, sir? Okay. Yes.
I have a business partner / company in China, and the way I send money over dollars, it goes to Thailand.
Exactly. So you have just seen this up live. And another place, there's other places, they're among us. No, I'm kidding. There's other places where you can see this. If you go to Chinese freelancers, you know, it's illegal, but if you ask them, that is the power of peer-to-peer. Exactly. And so a lot of this, and what you realize is this is like a very, very big problem. This is like $1 trillion problem, basically. I think now we're getting to the point where like supply chains and energy really, really matter. I think now at this particular moment.
I thought another question was about Chinese liquidity. So they're pumping a lot of liquidity into the market. It doesn't necessarily find its way to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, another version of this deck that I have like shows that Bitcoin inflows have been going up. Yeah. There is more liquidity in the system, although the Chinese central bank has been more, they purport, and I think this might be largely true mostly because of electric vehicles and other things, like to have more deflation than inflation. Their position is there is like a reduction in terms of the interest rate targeting or the reserve rate requirement. Like those two things. I'm starting to get into that central banking rabbit hole, which please stop me. But the basic point being like, yes, there is more liquidity. Some of that is passing through into Bitcoin, but not as much. And actually the bigger blocker has been stablecoins in that space. So the last time we did a little bit of a camp, and just for everyone here, stablecoins, you know, obviously the US dollar backed thing that you can redeem token for token that's backed by an issuing company, right? And I think that model really works for China. I think that's actually like the biggest boss was always the US dollar. Like we were just talking about this in the room. Like the US dollar is the one thing where if you screw up, there's only two things I think I've ever heard where it's like if you screw up your job, you get paid more. It's the US dollar and like meth. If you make worse meth, you're gonna get paid more. The addicts are still gonna come. It's gonna be more diluted. They're gonna have to buy more, but they will buy more. Did I just compare the U.S. dollar to meth addicts? Possibly, but you know, I think you get up my point. I'm gonna try to skip. How am I doing on time? Oh, 6:58. That's all good. If any of you feels like you want to escape right now, blink twice. We'll get you. So yeah, just really quickly, because one of the other things that we wanted to really talk about. So we kind of went through like China hates capitalism. That's not true. Chinese officials fear Bitcoin. No, some of them are using it, right? And now we're getting into the too much electricity energy usage, right? That kind of standard argument, like Bitcoin is waste and there's too much electricity being used. So I think now we live in a moment where we realize just supply chains and energy really, really matter. And sorry, I'm a little bit of a geek about this kind of stuff, so I went a little bit deep on some of the examples. I'm not going to read out each one. Yeah.
One that stands out to me is you use the term Davosian, and is that in reference to the World Economic Forum?
Yes.
So here, just so you know, we call them globalist control freaks that make me mad as hell.
Yeah, that didn't fit the slide, but I mean the general idea.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's yeah. Just couldn't fit the slide, unfortunately. I had to punch it down a little bit down below, but yeah, just to make the general point, I think someone usually asks me about Taiwan, but no one has yet, so we'll keep that streak going. But just maybe 2 quick points. Like one is that a lot of U.S. military components are actually made in China. This has been a deliberate consequence of a system that has decided that it doesn't matter where things are manufactured. Exactly. And then in China, I mean, natural gas imports in Taiwan, a naval blockade would starve Taiwan of energy resources in 11 days.
Well, that's the whole point of Iran, according to some. They're trying to choke off supply chains for energy for China. Is one of the things I've read.
That is an interesting argument, but China's pretty well diversified.
I'm not saying it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. But I understand. That could be. But again, this all stuff is all way over my head. But I will make the general point that China imports from like a lot of different providers. That's kind of their usual policy. And Taiwan and South Korea are actually probably going to be the ones that are hit the hardest and have been hit the hardest. And actually, you know, what are the effects of all this? So first, what we saw, China, by the way, is manufacturing aluminum. The United States does not manufacture aluminum anymore, and no longer can. It can only recycle aluminum. It's not competitive. Because the thing with aluminum is aluminum used to be like the way to export electricity, right? Like as a cost input, electricity is such a large part of the product. Like bauxite and the ore, like, you know, now it's Bitcoin. But before it was aluminum. Aluminum has surged. Don't want to bore you with all the details, but basically America can no longer manufacture aluminum at scale. Competitively. Well, I mean, or at all. But yes, like basically, yeah. I did want to show you guys this because I thought it was really interesting. Because another implication of this is the AI token wars, which we talk about a little bit. I didn't want to stress about it too much because it's part of this presentation is really 100% about that. But just to make the point, this is kind of Open Router, and these are kind of like the LLM leaderboards. And Minimax is Chinese, Kimi is Chinese, DeepSeek is Chinese. The Chinese models are winning for usage. And there's a very simple reason for that. They cost less. And why do they cost less? Well, they cost less because even though, well, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, actually. I don't actually know specifically what reason why you might have laughed.
It's because we basically said that GPUs are a strategic resource, and we wanted to limit how many China could acquire, and also the power of what they could acquire.
Yeah, the NVIDIA, yeah, the chip restrictions.
So essentially what they did then was they optimized in ways that we didn't have to.
Yeah, I mean, there's two points I'm going to make here. One is that, as it turns out, LLMs they're more incremental than revolutionary. And the latest performance chips, the performance is only so much better. The real input factor is electricity. And the Chinese electric rates are so cheap. It also probably doesn't help that cloud and OpenAI are just gonna get banned from working for them ever, like pay ridiculous salaries, which is just like this crazy thing where there's people in SF that are getting paid like a crazy amount of money to do like AI management or whatever. So all this to say, like last time I took a look, like some of these Chinese models are 10x cheaper. And they're like the results are about the same. Like it's gotten to that point where, you know, they're not, the cloud is better in most, if not all instances. But that's not what this is about anymore, right? This is about exporting electricity. So,
I just have to say, it's ironic that our protectionist policy around that essentially led to the Chinese people doing essentially what Ayn Rand talked about in that was shrugged of how like, hey, Hank Rearden, you know, just got around the policies by making better metal.
yeah.
It never fails to impress me of the ingenuity, creativity of the Chinese people despite everything.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, I've been thinking about that a lot because I live in this kind of like middle generation, just to give maybe a little bit of insight. I don't claim to be like the most accessed or privileged. Like, I did not sit down with Xi Jinping and prepare these slides together for you, for sure not. But what I can say is having looked at both cultures, you know, like Chinese entrepreneurs hustle really, really hard. They hustle really, really damn hard. You gotta give them all the credit in the world for that. And they're at the Bitcoin conferences. They're hustling. They're buying booths. They're part of the stand. Kanan just came by. Like they're coming through, and you know, it's a whole different vibe out there.
When you create sanctions, you create instability. It's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
Every time you do that. So there's a major fragility all over the world because of our sanctions. All over the world.
And also the entrepreneurs in the AI sector in China, they're used to playing rough. They're used to playing rough with each other. They're used to playing rough with anything. I mean, like they're really like, you know, like, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy work hours. It's crazy everything. But they are used to like pushing out the lowest cost product. Temu, we all make jokes, you know, but there's these factory producers out there. They saw a problem and they were like, you know what, we're just gonna solve it by making the cost 10x lower. Same thing with electric cars. And you get to a point where the governments that are outside of this are trying to control this by saying like, oh, like we're gonna ban imports, we're gonna ban this. It just misses the point.
I have to think some Chinese entrepreneurs like looking at the Trump tariffs and they're like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah. I mean, they have to deal with so much stuff like internally. And one reason I've been thinking about actually recently is that, I mean, I think the Cultural Revolution generation, this is something like a little bit more personal, but like the Cultural Revolution generation, I think was a little bit too Trump. For those who don't know, like 1970s, like very bad things, cannibalism, lots of people dead, red guards, three-body problem, if you want to watch the first scene. Really, really bad stuff. That did count as a heckle. No kidding. but the generation that came after that, I think they were just close enough to have like witnessed starvation, but not quite traumatized enough by it. So I think this like 90s and 80s generation, which is a lot of the Bitcoin entrepreneurs kind of came from that kind of ethos, right? They were opening up internet cafes, and they were opening up all this stuff. There's a book at the end that I'll recommend to everyone called Age of Ambition, and it really summed up like China. I think, even though it's written by a foreign writer, Evan Osnos, it really sums up that era where like Chinese entrepreneurs were to get rich is to get glorious, and I think. For some people in China at the time, that was so revolutionary that nothing happened. Nothing came out of it. But 20 or 15 years later, this generation earnestly believes it and is executing on it and is in our communities as well. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to, we're at like 7:08 p.m. So basically like the energy environment debate really, I think, centers down to what you think waste is, right? And obviously, you know, the one thing I will say about China is that there is a very ideological bent to how resources are allocated. And a lot of it is really not about actually the environmental goals. So you might have heard, like, for example, China has invested the most into renewables. Yeah, but guess what country has the most coal power starts? Exactly. And most of the energy mix is hydroelectricity and coal, which is, by the way, a perfect mix for Bitcoin miners, which is why Bitcoin mining was such a big thing. The net zero goals are pushed back. I don't even forget the exact date, either 2060 or 2070. I don't really quite know at this point. And you know, now you saw early on they're building more and more coal power because now they believe that AI is a strategic battle between them and the United States. And they're going to try to build as much electricity as possible. So all this to make the point that, like, you know, we're not talking about, like, is the electricity being generated? Is the energy being used? Because a lot of it right now is going towards training these models that honestly could just be like one or two and could be like reasonably cheap per like the electricity rate, right? Versus, you know, right now we have, with the heat punks, I think, what's really interesting is you are doing two things at once. You are freeing up energy and electricity. You could be hashing at any time, and it makes all the sense in the world for you to hash. I forget the exact stats now. I talked with Tyler. I mean, this space has Tyler and all these other people who are absolute gems in this space about the heat punks. But just the incredible amount of waste that happens because, you know, and that's kind of a funny thing to think about. Like, to heat punks, all heat being generated right now is kind of waste because you could have been mining Bitcoin with it, right? You could have been mining Bitcoin. And it has a double benefit, which is that you create the conditions for a new money that allows people to defray from the worst of the state. And I think that will become more and more and more important, not to make this into this like dark rabbit hole, but as we enter into this age of uncertainty, chaos, and war, you will want tools like Bitcoin. And people have been using tools like Bitcoin and will continue to use it. And the need and demand for it will continue to rise because the excesses of the state will continue to get worse. So yeah, like kind of overall, like the heat punks are, you know, going towards where the incentives are. They're redefining waste. They're pushing to what the people want. 5-year planning, which is kind of the Chinese government model, is, you know, go where the government commands. The government says this is good, that's what we're investing in. The government says this is bad, we're leaving. That leads to massive electricity production throughout the grid, but also consistent blackouts, like we mentioned. That leads to AI and compute becoming top-down technology. This is this whole idea of the industrial development model. Like, this is how a country wins in a war of models and a war of strategy.
What's that? Massive electricity production and then also blackouts. Just because you have so much, you don't actually maintain grid stability.
No, some of the provinces just like have a lot of hydroelectricity, and it's seasonal. It's seasonal, and then they don't.
When the water's not running, they're not having any power.
Well, the other thing too is like when they have a lot of power, they can't export it out because there isn't. That's like the. Yeah, unless they mine Bitcoin. So that was the standard thing, was they would go and mine Bitcoin when it was seasonally favorable, and then they would go to other regions like Xinjiang with coal and all this other stuff where it was not, you know. And this is all, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point because we're all Bitcoiners here, but, you know, the whole dung beetle thing, it's like Bitcoin miners aren't trying to, like, go towards a particular energy source. They're completely neutral. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. Like, heat punks go towards where the incentives are, right? 5-year planning, made in China 2025, sets the incentives top down. So, you know, wow, I have a lot of slides. One thing I just want to say about this really quickly is just, we're going to go into this just a little bit. Like, as part of an expression of this central control, my book goes into it a lot more, not to show my book, but Bitcoin and stablecoins are illegal under certain circumstances in China if they're used as currency. There are Bitcoin exchanges that kind of run informal ways, like they're like OTC counters kind of, to help people there. We're going to go into mining a little bit more, the status. There have been some law enforcement arrests for people trading. 1,200 people were arrested in 2022 for trading virtual currencies in China. Although I have to admit, some of the cases are very, very, very incredulous. It's kind of like if you went to the cops and were like, hey, they stole my weed. It's like, why did you have the weed? So you see some cases like that, for example. People going to the cops being like, they stole my, my digital currency. Please help me obtain my illegal digital currency back. So that does happen, and sometimes it's labeled onto other crimes as well. One of the things I found kind of interesting is that this doesn't apply just to Bitcoin. The Chinese party state actually is quite advanced at taking down adjacent technologies. So China has the world's most advanced block on Tor. They're very, very sophisticated. Tor is this anonymization network that allows you to, whatever, for simplification purposes, allows you to browse the web. Yeah, I'm just trying for the recording and for other people. But yes, they also took down, I mean, this is one of the funnest stories I got for the book, which is Will told me that they took down Damus, like basically went after them personally and actually messed with the technology. You have to give the Chinese state a little bit of credit there. Like, they're following the latest developments, possibly even more than some of us. Like BitDevs draws, 20 attendees plus maybe 3 or 4 people from the Chinese government, right? I can't fathom it because but Damus, like Will was literally like, no one on earth, like they went after the relays like 2 or 3 days later. Do you know what that means? No, the default relays of Damus were banned. Do you know what that means? That means someone's been listening to Will's mad rants for like the last 3 or 4 months at the ministry, like at the cyberspace administration of China. They probably assigned 2 or 3 people to track Will. I love Will. He's like a crazy man. He's got 1 or 2 minders because they figured out immediately how the tech worked, and they weren't attacking it in an unsophisticated way. Like they understood it, enough of the tech to actually, they are among us. I mean, I don't know, BitDevs, got to be careful with the topic sometimes.
That's also difficult to do with a regular firewall because Nostr uses WebSockets.
Exactly.
So if you try to just block WebSockets, you break a bunch of shit that people ordinarily use.
But they thought of that, right? They were like, here's the balance, and here's how we're going to target specifically the default relays. They do actually something similar with Jitsi and Element. Because the theory is they're not trying to prevent all people everywhere from using technology. It's actually a very keen insight. And it's the problem that Bitcoiners fall into all the time. It's like, who hurt me? Who hurt Lightning adoption? And then you go to a Lightning meetup and it's like, well, in order to be fully sovereign in the Lightning sense, you have to spend 6 hours becoming a system admin, right? China understands, nobody wants to do that shit. They just want to click a button and be able to send emails, or they just want to be able to click a button and do something. So I actually think the way the Chinese state attacked this technology demonstrates a very sophisticated understanding of how to deny technologies. And they applied it even to Damus, which is kind of wild because that was when Damus, I mean, at one point they were pretty popular in China. It was the number 8 app or something like that. So big ups to Will, but that's kind of crazy. Will's just one guy, and they went after Damus. Yeah, I don't think it's actively. There's not active. I feel like BitChat tends to become really, really active whenever there's an active revolution. It's funny because I was talking to some of the guys, the BitChat guys, and they were like they don't. This is such an American story. It's oh, we don't know what's going on, but we know there's a revolution in Morocco because our user dashboard says there's a lot of Morocco. They're we don't know anything about the context, but we think Morocco is revolting right now. They have this dashboard that just shows where their countries are surging. And normally, it hasn't been China, and I don't think it would be China because there just hasn't been anything physical or kinetic. I will say, though, that Nostr, some of the more interesting things are there are privacy advocates on there who teach people how to evade the Great Firewall, which is a skill that is much in demand. People always say, China's internet, shut down, censored, people don't know anything. And that's half true. But the other half truth of that is a lot of people try to escape that system of control and surveillance. And you know what they're more frustrated by? They're not frustrated by oh, I can't post about Tiananmen Square. I 1989, formative part of my experience. I'm just gonna be brutally honest though. Most people in China when they're posting, they're not there are very few people, and those posts on Damus are really cool to see, or Nostr. They commemorate the Tiananmen victims. I do that every year, just again trying in my quest to get arrested. But the thing about it though is that I don't think that's the vast majority. Kind of my point with the revolution will not be televised. right? It's not like this very obvious thing where like suddenly 1 million Chinese youth are gonna come out of nowhere and be like, we really hate what happened in Tiananmen Square. I would, at the risk of my neck and freedom personally, maybe that would be really cool, but I don't see it happening. But what I do see happening is people using these technologies, and you know what they're most annoyed by, if there's like one call out to the Bitcoin community, the user experience. They hate the surveillance state. But you know, they don't hate the surveillance state necessarily because they're like, oh fuck, like, we're so repressed. Like, it's terrible. Like, yeah, kind of, but really what they hate most is like, dude, I gotta register my phone number on this app. Like, it's, you know, they're gonna text me, they're gonna call me and be like, why are you calling so many overseas numbers? Dude, my VPN sucks. Like, this is so slow. Like, I can't access anything. I can't watch porn. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, that's the kind of stuff that people, and if I were to point at that, like, I think the Chinese state actually has been pretty smart about how it's attacked technologies like Bitcoin. Because it understands that fundamentally, like, this is kind of the thing, that you give people enough of a reason to join the network to make the incentive strong enough, but you also have to reduce the friction. And if you don't reduce the friction, the Chinese state will help you increase it.
My working hypothesis is, though, if you think I'm right, is that the United States pays attention to what China does in this area, and then copies it.
I don't know who copies who at this point. I mean, China copies the US copies China.
I'm sure they're copying.
I think China's learned a lot. I think China's learned a lot from the surveillance state here. I think the US has learned a lot from the surveillance state there. You know, I think Flock, you know, has probably learned a lot about how China has implemented things. And, you know, I quote tweeted Gary Tan. I got 67 Twitter likes, which I consider quite legit. And he 67, exactly. He literally had a quote that was like, if it's American surveillance, it's good. If it's Chinese surveillance, it's bad. And I was like, ladies and gentlemen, this is like the #1 altcoin sponsor, just by the way, the #1 WorldCoin sponsor. So you guys might have heard about the digital yuan. It is the world's most advanced central bank digital currency. To our earlier point of government control, yes. The short and skinny version is that the Chinese state would much rather the digital yuan succeed and does not want people using Bitcoin and stable coins because of that. And they're especially actually pissed about stable coins.
What's the uptake? You said customer adoption is slow. What's the percentage?
It was like 1% or 1.5% of cash flow. I know, rookie numbers, rookie numbers. But you know, but you know, why is customer adoption slow? Because people are like, well, I mean, yeah, people are like, I got WeChat, and I got WeChat Pay, I got Alipay. I'm not saying those are great either, by the way, but like, why do I need to download this new app? And even, like, Chinese people are dumb is the other thing, too. Like, we just talked about Chinese people, very entrepreneurial. They're not like, or at least, I mean, again, China is big, vast. I'm sure there's some dumb Chinese people, sure. But the majority, they're not like, oh my God, like, this new government app came out? Wow, it promises free money? That's definitely not going to be surveilled. Like, no, it's like, no, like, people understand this. They might not say that to your face, but that's just because the Chinese internet deals in irony. It deals in irony and shit posting, and one of the things that I've always been consistently very impressed by is Iranian and Chinese shit posters are just significantly better than Americans. I think it's the same point with the, sorry, I've been slamming, States is great too. Like, I love Denver, I love hamburger patties, I love all this good stuff. Yeah, exactly. 51st state, you know. So I'm about to get imprisoned by 3 governments. We're trying to get a pick. Whoever wins gets a maple syrup. You know. You got a question?
Yeah, how much of the Chinese economy is still cash? Because I was under the impression that China was like ahead of the U.S. in terms of eliminating cash because it's hard to surveil.
Yeah, it's very cash. It's pretty cashless as a society. Oh, having said that, there are always these like old people's fables about, like, you know, there's this grandma who like had like all of her life savings in a crate and it got eaten by rats or something. Like, there are a lot of older Chinese people. I have to include in that, like, my grandma, for example. They were just like such big believers in cash, and I God bless. But at the end of all that, I was like calculating the real rate of return on her money, and I was like, man, you held the money and it lost like 60 or 80% of its value over the course of the last little while. It's like crazy if you think about it. But you know, there is, so China is kind of this very interesting thing where it was one of the societies that used cash the most, and then it became one of the societies that used it the least. And the reason why, yeah. Yeah, even beggars on the street, they'll like ask you for WeChat Pay payments. Like they're not gonna ask you for cash. Yeah. It's actually very difficult. And I've had conversations with Bitcoiners about this because they're like, how do I evade, financial surveillance and stuff? Because really to operate in China, even to take mass transit, even to take other things, like you have to use a phone app. My usual tip, just by the way, for everyone here, again, on that run of trying to get arrested, find a Chinese friend who has a WeChat Pay account and just be at the hip with them. Just get them cash. I'm just saying. That would be my solution. It's a good tip. Your personal banker, yeah. But otherwise, it's actually very hard to operate with cash around. Like a lot of shops and they don't accept cash anymore. And so China's trying a lot of things to make the digital yuan kind of like a global standard, but people don't want it. And now they've gotten so desperate, they're making it interest-bearing, which is just all kinds of weird. Is it a bank account now? Is it not? Like, no one really knows, right? You think the ECB will learn?
Because Tim Lagarde is actually going to make it interest like the other way, like negative interest. Like you have to pay to keep money.
Well, it's funny. Some of the big CBDC proponents cite that as a massive value prop. And the way they say it is like, well, central banks now only have the power to do broad targeting of the economy. But where were we to find those real fuckers, those Bitcoiners who only buy a chair? They don't consume in our economy. Their propensity to save is like 99.9%, and make them negative interest rate on all their holdings. So they gotta spend, they gotta put their money out. And that's actually like a really big value prop. And I've gotten into Twitter beefs with people like that. They're kind of one-sided. I'm like, hey, I think this is a dystopian idea, and they never reply back to me. But I think it's quite dystopian because you get to the point where you have individual, and that's the CBDC. That's my other speech track that I go on. But like, yeah, they had like expiry of funds. They forced expired funds. They had negative interest rates. All things are possible on the highway to hell. Yes. Okay. I didn't quite draw the connection there, but yes. Although to that point, Mao, one of the first things he did. I mean, Mao, I think Mao gained political power because he was very, very keen about this is where power comes from. So what are the first two things he did? He monopolized guns and he monopolized banking. He was the one who actually created the People's Bank of China, consolidated all the regional banks together into a central bank. So what actually happened with the ban on Bitcoin mining? How's everyone doing, by the way, for energy levels? Everyone good? Everyone good? Woo! Okay, great. Alrighty. We're just going to power through this. So, some of you might be like, what actually happened with Bitcoin mining and the bans, right? Because we talked about like some different reasons. And yeah, I think like going all the way back, I would say that China hates capitalism, bogus reason. Chinese officials fear Bitcoin. I think maybe some elite officials. I do have to say Xi Jinping's never personally commented on Bitcoin, but who knows what he thinks, probably negatively. But there are a lot of Chinese officials who use Bitcoin. There's too much electricity energy usage. That's just an ideological term. Environmental concerns, we wrap that into that. I think the thing that is most valid is really the central planning element. I do think the reason why the Bitcoin mining bans happened, like if you strip everything away from it, what it really was that Bitcoin mining was decided to be an activity detrimental to the Chinese state. And that was like kind of what kicked off these province by province bans. So what happened was there was Liu He, who was kind of Xi Jinping's best economic friend, and he basically said Bitcoin mining was harmful for the whole of Chinese society. Before that, and I was actually watching these old videos, the Chinese miners were like, we think the Chinese government, it's not illegal, it's not legal, it's a gray zone, right? But the Chinese government hasn't come out against it. But in 2021, the Chinese government did. And that was when you started seeing the provinces, and they had all kinds of weird bans. Inner Mongolia had a snitch line. They were like, hey, if you catch your neighbors Bitcoin mining, call this line, and we're gonna like arrest them and stuff like that. A lot of the miners, they moved all over the place. They moved many to the U.S., right?
I heard from the New York Times that the Bitcoin miners that came from China basically made it so that the electrical grid in Texas was so unstable that like 500 people died in the cold.
Yeah, your sourcing could not be more pristine. I have to say. Um,
I mean, if you think about it, it kind of violates causality because one thing happened before the other thing, but
yeah, and I mean, I'm sure Chinese miners are like the favorite people in Chinese government circles as well. But here's the thing. Chinese companies are still able to manufacture ASICs. There's ASIC shops in Shenzhen. People were still mining. I mean, I was talking about it until Reuters broke it, but like, yeah, like there's been mining going on in Xinjiang forever. It never shut off, apparently. And why is that the case? Well, because it's really hard to ban Bitcoin mining, actually. Even governments that have the ability to surveil the electrical grid and, access and control. No, please. It's very provincially dependent because the provinces, you see, control the police forces. And so that was how Xiao Yi was able to run his own little like Bitcoin mining operation because he had the cops on board, he had everyone on board. Because you can't really run a Bitcoin mine without like the local authorities knowing. Because like they have access over the electricity grid. They're gonna notice like, oh my God, all this electricity is being consumed. And they're gonna go and send the police to investigate. They're gonna be like, hey, like what's this like buzzing sound that's like happening over here, right? So yes, you do need local government support, and in fact, all the instances that we've seen have been local government officials propping it up, or being involved somehow with private miners, even with the private miners. And yeah, it's gotta get the insiders. It's a good gig if you can get it. But mining persists even in China, and I'm just gonna say like all the reasons why China lost and Bitcoin gained. I'm a little bit of a homer here, but let's go for that. So China lost most immediately like local tax revenue. Like and one thing I should stress is that the local governments in China are like getting bankrupt. Basically, this has to do with another rabbit hole that we will not have time to go into. But if you ever want to have a fun ChatGPT round, Zhurongji's 1997 land reform on taxes basically made it so that local governments can only raise money through property valuations. That's also part of the reason why there's a property boom and bust in China as well. But yeah, China lost a lot of local tax revenue. And you have all these governors and you have all these party secretaries, and they're being told by Xi Jinping, like, you got to solve the poverty problem. And they're like, well, I have all this electricity, but no one's buying it from me, except for these miners. So why can't I work with them, right? So it's just like a net loss in terms of jobs, net loss in terms of tax revenue. And there have been there's a Chinese Hong Kong professor who made that point in an op-ed. And it's a very simple point. And in fact, I didn't finish this point, but the Chinese government's probably more pissed about stablecoins than they are pissed about Bitcoin. And the reason why is because they understand stablecoins more as an enemy model. They're like so pissed because they're like, we're trying to get away from treasuries, and our people are buying treasuries illegally through like butt meme 420 OTC shop. Like, how's this even happening, right? I don't know, I'm just making a joke, but like, I actually tried dealing with some of these OTC dealers, and they're pretty sus. It's pretty clear that they're like maybe one guy in a basement with like a local bank account or something. No offense to those people, but there was a ton of expertise lost. And it was mining and HPC expertise because, for example, a lot of the Chinese Bitcoin miners, they were pretty ahead of their time. I mean, they went through an Ethereum mining phase. That got them really close to GPUs, but a lot of them invested early into AI chips and everything related to that. They kind of recirculated that. And a lot of that expertise and investment now has left China. For example, Jihan is now in Singapore. They're unable to, so we just went over like how China can dominate entire economies by just being able to export electricity. And that's basically what was happening with Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin was dominated by Chinese chip manufacturers and Chinese mining because China was exporting its electricity through this means. Well, now it no longer can. I chose not to. And I really like, there's this Chinese official who just wrote an op-ed about this, a former vice premier, a vice minister of finance, like the second most senior position in the Chinese Ministry of Finance. And he basically, to sum up his article, he was like, anyways, everyone's doing it, and we don't benefit at all from that. And I think that's like a big, big strategic loss that people on the Chinese side are now recognizing. And I know, people are confused about like Hong Kong, China. We're not going to have time to go into that. But I do believe that there is a contingency of people who recognize some of the faults of the strategy. And they get posted on South China Morning Post, which is owned by Jack Ma, who also owns Alibaba. So buyer beware Alibaba, of course, Alipay, one of the big wallets. Always funny to see the political ties, yes?
Question about Jack Ma. What happened to him?
He disappeared for a period of time. He was given some time to reflect. He reflected, and he came back. Yeah, he did a little, he had some things to say about the banking sector. And then he thought about those things and did not say them anymore. Yeah, I mean, but a pleasant one, One in Spain, actually, in one of his many resorts, because he was there for a little bit. But South China Morning Post, shout out to South China Morning Post. Like they're always, I see you, we see you. Don't stop doing it because, but like we see you. They go pretty hard on the digital yuan. Some of the more critical stuff on the digital yuan is actually from the South China Morning Post. There's two. Oh. So like five minders. Fun fact, there's one camera for every 2 people in China. So 700 million. But we just finished talking about how there's 1.1 billion Chinese people. You can't believe any of the statistics. As Abraham Lincoln said, But you know what, y'all? I'm just going to say like what Bitcoin gained. A supply chain without over-reliance on one country. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. Big deal. I had to deal with, some of you might have commented. I forgot to mention this, I guess. I've been writing about Bitcoin since 2014, so I've seen it all. I've seen every FUD cycle possible. And I had to go through that god-awful time where people were like, Bitcoin is controlled by China because all the miners are Chinese. And I had to go through that because I had to be like,
There's a huge amount of FUD. Like people would just FUD the shit out of it. Oh, it's China coin.
Brad from Ripple, especially. That's a call out, Brad, if you're watching the stream. Consider the source, right? And so at the very least, I no longer have to write articles about that. But no, I mean, I think, okay, I don't want to belabor the obvious, but it's obviously very good that Bitcoin is no longer dependent or as dependent on one country for mining, for creating the mining chips, and for centralization of all these things.
Oh, except now it's dependent on this country.
Yeah, I mean, from the frying pan to the fire, but nobody said the revolution would be easy. Right. But, I mean, even with the switch to the United States, there is still I think some of the physical mining is still moving out into different places. Like, I do think, like, it's not as clear set as before with the Chinese hash rate. One really funny thing to me is just much better communication. I had the privilege of interviewing a lot of the early miners who had to deal with Bitmain's documentation back in the day. Like, they did not write documentation in English. Man, but I mean, like, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Like, it says I'm fluent in the back of my book, but I still could use that extra level of Chinese school. But Marshall actually learned Mandarin. That was like one of the early miners who came up to me. Shout out to Marshall. He's probably the most likely out of all the other people that I've name called. Like, what have I name called? Like Xi Jinping and like Brad Carling. I was like, yeah, Marshall's probably the one that actually probably genuinely would watch this maybe. But that's how, like, I mean, it used to be the case, like, if you had to deal with minors, you had to, it's like, those like unironic memes. It's like, you want to do well in the world? Go learn Chinese, Hats off, like Marshall went and learned Mandarin. Like, that's what you had to do because all the documentation, all the stuff was was in Mandarin. And now, because the Chinese miners, I mean, we saw a great example of this because Canaan sent their team here. And they have to have a US team, and they have to have US customer service, and they have to have English-speaking people in their company, because now they're selling to Bitcoin miners who are mining in the US, even though they might be Chinese to begin with. They're going to sell into this country. And of course, the hash power just continues to increase post-2021. We're going through like a little bit of a dip right now. But my point being overall, if you took nothing out of this talk, we just keep on rolling on. Bitcoin just keeps on going block by block. I did want to put this out here because I know we're in a little bit of a bear market right now. Let's just say, whatever. I'm a little bit of like a financial nihilist, so I don't really, I did lose all my Bitcoin in a boating accident before, yes. Yeah, exactly. But having said that, I'm a little bit of a financial nihilist. So to me, the price is actually, I hate to say it, but like when the price gets low, actually BitDevs gets more exciting. I don't really know why that's the case, but that's like almost like an axiom. It's almost like Godwin's law, but for Bitcoin. It's just like, if the Bitcoin price goes down, you should expect your next BitDevs to be attended by 5 or 10 people you normally don't see, and for you to talk about 2 or 3 ideas you normally don't talk about. And that's, shout out to the Vancouver BitDevs. And that is something that I've consistently seen. And so I kind of wanted to end on this note, which is that I think the biggest thing that we gained as Bitcoiners is an appreciation that a government literally said this is a harmful, bad technology. We will not endorse it. We will arrest you if you are contributing to the network. I mean, obviously there was some imperfect impasse of that. Again, we talked about mining still continuing in some regions. But this was a very big deal. And do we even remember this anymore? Because this is exactly when that happened. This is exactly when that dipped. Where are we even now? Where are we even now? So I just wanted to end on this note. If you took nothing else from this talk, I think what we gained as Bitcoiners is a real appreciation of who the enemy is, what the enemy can do, and how resilient Bitcoin can be. Thank you.